Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I am Lynn Hessinga, principal at SVA in our nonprofit industry group. I've been working with nonprofit organizations now for over 14 years, providing consulting, assurance, and tax services. I also work closely with Kirsten Houghton, who is another principal at SVA in our nonprofit industry group, and she'll pop back on at the end of today's presentation to do the close and wrap with you. Today's discussion will center around cybersecurity for nonprofits and how to protect your data. Our key takeaways today include understanding your current cybersecurity protections and your gaps, knowing the tools you already have and how they can help, and finally, make sure your people are helping as they are your best defense. So with our virtual format, we'll take questions for our speakers using the chat feature, and we'll make sure we address those questions throughout today's discussion. Later today, you'll receive a survey via email. Please take the time to complete the survey as we do use the information you provide to continue to improve our offerings and tailor our future presentations to meet your needs. Our next event will be on Thursday, May 19th. And as the date gets closer, we'll decide if we can continue with virtual or if we can meet in person. We're currently working on a topic and speakers for that event. At this time, I'd like to introduce Mark Schaefer and Anna Bennett. Mark is the Chief Information Security Officer with SVA Consulting. Mark is a recognized consultant and leader in security program design and build, ensuring the security strategies he deploys are in alignment with his client's business objectives. Anna is a senior security engineer with SVA Consulting, and in her role, Anna uses industry best practices and standards to provide clients with numerous security consulting services, including risk assessments, framework policy packages, and control implementation. So with that, Mark and Anna, please take it away.
Easy for you to say because I couldn't find my mute button. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Schaefer. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. With me, I have Anna Bennett. Anna?
Yes, hi, my name is Anna Bennett. I have been doing security for about 15 years now, and my passions are security engineer and compliance officer, anything from deploying really neat security engineer tools to making sure that our clients are compliant with the frameworks that they need to be compliant with. Mark has been doing cybersecurity for over 20 years now. His passions are maturing security teams, and they're maturing their security program. In his last company, he matured a security department from scratch all the way to 0 to 50 employees within a 5-year period. And now he works as a virtual Chief Information Security Officer, VCISO, for our clients, helping them build their security program and maturing their security programs.
And Anna's an engineer I've worked with for a number of years. I really like the way that she can dig into details and understand complex problems. But the thing that doesn't get brought up enough is she's a wonderful documenter. In my business, it's really, really helpful to have someone that can take care of the documentation as well as do the actual work. And so Anna excels in both. And that's one of the reasons I really like working with Anna. Excuse me. So today we're going to talk about cybersecurity, how it can be implemented, and it affects not-for-profits. And we're going to start with the baselines. We're going to talk basically around how do you know if you have cybersecurity? How do you know if it's good enough? How do you know where to start? How do you know what to spend your time and your energy on? And the way to do that is to compare yourself to some baseline, some standard. We've done this in education for a number of years. There's something you compare yourself to and you get a grade or a score. We're going to talk about doing that with cybersecurity, so you get an awareness inside of your organization of what's bad, what's good, what should I be worried about first. Then we're going to talk about the endpoint protection. That's the laptop, the mobile phone, the computer. That's the things that you interface with day in and day out. How to protect those, how to take care of those, how to make sure that they're as secure as they can be. To help keep your environment safe. Third thing we're going to talk about is security tools. There are tools that are out there that are already on your systems that you may or may not know about. Making sure they work, making sure they work properly, how to make sure they're configured correctly. And then if you've identified a gap in your baseline, that tells you that you need a tool, what's the area you should look for first? So we'll talk a little bit about the security tools that are built in or that you already have. And then if not, what should you be looking at? We're going to move on and talk about two-factor authentication. This has gotten a lot of press lately because it's a really straightforward, I was going to say easy. It's a really straightforward way to make sure that the person signing into a computer is who they say they are. Most banks, financial institutions have moved to some two-factor authentication. This is where you don't only put in a password, you have to have something else to make sure it's really you. So that if somebody steals your password, they're not able to use it because they don't have that second factor, which could be a cell phone or typically nowadays it's a cell phone. We're going to move on to talk about patching and updating, making sure everything is latest and greatest. There's a vulnerability today in the wild that's affecting a lot of systems, and vendors are scrambling to issue patches. So we're going to talk about how to make sure those patches get done timely to keep everything up to date and current. We're going to talk a little bit about awareness training, making sure that everybody that touches computers, touches data is trained, make sure that the training is sufficient for what they do, but it's also up to date and that they're looking for the right things, because we're going to talk about number 7, which is the best defense that you can have. And that's the people that operate your computers. There's a lot of stuff that can get caught simply by having your people aware and looking for bad things to happen. So we're going to start with a baseline. We like to start security programs. If anybody's interested in starting a security program, we say, okay, first, let's talk about your regulatory requirements. Are you in some sort of medical business? Is HIPAA a concern for you? Do you accept credit card payments? Is PCI, payment card industry, a concern for you? Are you publicly regulated? Do you have international clients? Do you have governmental clients? So we start to look like, what are the base requirements of doing business? And if there's already a requirement out there to compare your security to, let's start there. There's no reason to make something up if you've already got regulatory requirements. So we like to take these baselines, as we call them, and bring them in, and that's what we do our security compare against. And if none of these apply to you, the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, which is up in the top left-hand corner, is published by the federal government, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And they just say, hey, if you're going to put a computer system in, here's a good set of rules to follow. We found that the NIST Cybersecurity Framework is a good place to start. It covers most of the bad things that happen at some level, and it helps get an understanding of where resources should be spent. And so if there is a regulatory requirement, we're going to start with that. If there's not, we'll bring in NIST. There's a few others that we can bring in depending on if you have a feel for that. But NIST is just easy because there's a lot of tools around it and there's a lot of knowledge already there. And we'll just start with, here's what a good enough security program looks like. The next thing we move on to is, what are your requirements in your organization? So most securities start with policy. Most security programs start with policies. What are the rules of the road for the people that work in the organization? And these are documents that say, thou shalt, right? This is what you got to do. If there's password requirements, let's put them in a policy. If there's other requirements, let's put them in a policy so that people understand what it is expected of them when they start the job. Most organizations already have some sort of policy, employee handbook. They're already there. We just like to look to make sure all the cybersecurity components are in those policies and are handled in a way that's going to keep you compliant with your regulatory requirements, but also secure. And then we move on to what we call the risk assessment process. Sounds scary, it's not. Basically, how does your organization compare to the framework that we started with? So we're going to go in and if we do a risk assessment, we go in and we look, there's 23 requirements in the NIST cybersecurity framework. We compare, how do you do logons compared to what NIST says we should be doing? Is there anything you're missing? Are you terminating accounts when you terminate people? If you are, how long do you wait? Because if that person's not happy, they're going to come in from the outside and perhaps do damage. And so we're going to compare those things, see how your organization is dealing versus what is a best practice around that. And so that's what we're going to do as a risk assessment. And I'm going to turn this over to Anna, and she's going to talk through what a risk assessment looks like.
Yeah, so thank you, Mark. So first, before we get into the process, I'd like to talk about what are the benefits of a risk assessment. So first and foremost, the main reason is just to identify your security gaps. You want to make sure, again, how Mark was saying, you want to have a good baseline of where you're at today. What is your security posture at today? Then once we figure out, identifying the security gaps, then we can figure out how are we going to mitigate those gaps. Implementing the appropriate controls or creating processes, documenting policies, procedures, things like that. Then we can prioritize those mitigations. You want to work with your high risks first. Then maybe work to your easy implementations. Documenting your current processes. When we do risk assessments, we find that there's a lot of things that people are doing. They just don't have it documented. Employees aren't properly trained on that. It might be like one person is only working on that process. Then once we prioritize, we want to evaluate potential security partners. Being a small company, sometimes you can't do everything. So you might want to research, security functions that you would want like a third party help with, or possibly using like a cloud application for a certain security protection. Then we want to establish, maintain, improve your compliance. So as Mark was stating before, if you need to be HIPAA compliant, then we want to make sure that within the risk assessment that you are compliant with all regulations. If you are not, then again, what are those gaps? Get your baseline, see where you are today, where you need to be in the future. Then you want to accurately forecast your future needs. So again, once we find out where you are today, well, what are your goals? What are your objectives of being somewhere in 6 months, 12 months, 18 months? Then once we, then we'll get into the risk assessment process. Sorry about that. So we'll prepare for the assessment. So we'll meet, we'll discuss, we'll cover the scope. What part of your environment are we going to do the risk assessment on? Are we going to do the risk assessment on the entire environment? We'll discuss all objectives, concerns, anything that's guiding this risk assessment. We'll discuss the risk assessment process. I'll kind of go over my analysis. I'll start with interviews, meet with multiple teams. That could be, just with your IT team, your legal team, HR. It just depends on your structure. But I usually meet with multiple teams. Then I'll gather all the information, ask for documentation, and then I'll use that information to perform the analysis. So that goes into the second step, conducting the assessment. So this is basically just performing the risk assessment. So I'm going to review your current security protections. I'm going to see, where you are in that security protection. Did you just implement one thing? Did you mature that protection, implement multiple things? I'm going to go into determining the security control effectiveness. Is it actually working as expected? And then I'm going to review the documentation and the current processes that you have in place. I'm also going to analyze the controls that are in place or the controls that you're going to have in the future. So when I do the risk assessment, I do like to note, if you do have a gap, but you're already working on improving that, then that's definitely something we want to note. Then we're going to prioritize the security risks that are identified. I like to add in an action plan that lists all of the identified findings that we found, whether that's all the way from critical to low. And then I'm going to put in some information on how to get you started to mitigate those risks. That way, you're just not getting a report that says, you have a gap. or you need to improve this, we actually add in information to get you started. And then we're going to prioritize that for you. We're going to work with you and your teams. Again, see where your goals are and your objectives, try to prioritize those risks. Definitely want to work on the criticals first, and we'll work with your team to put in an action item plan for you. Then once the analysis is done, I will create a report. I'll share those findings with your executive team. And if there's any point of contacts that I was working with in the assessment that are involved too, and we'll have a meeting. I'll go over my report. We'll go over all the identified risks, mainly focusing on the critical and high. We'll go over any of the improvements, like we were talking about before, the easy things to implement. You might have 20 things that you're doing and you just need to get them documented. So we'll note that too. Then the next step is maintaining the assessment. So once you have the assessment, you have your baseline. You'll want to make sure that you maintain that assessment so that you know where you're going to be in 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. So let's say you have identified finding and you implement a security control to help mitigate that finding. Well, you're going to want to do a reassessment, make sure that that control is working as expected, and then include that in maintaining your assessment. You're constantly updating your procedures, your processes. You will even update your risk management strategy. So there's going to be many factors that you're going to update and change over the upcoming months. So you'll want to, include that in your ongoing assessment. Just a few examples of common things that we have identified in assessments that are really important, that seem to get missed really easily. Further, what Mark was saying before about terminations. So sometimes people have a really good process for when an employee terminates, but they might be missing some key areas. There's multiple areas of access that an employee can have, and a good checklist to make sure that you're checking everything, making sure that you're removing all the access can help with that. That can be anything from just a regular account access, email access, to VPN access. A lot of people are remote right now. So you want to make sure that you remove the remote access, collecting all the assets, laptops, mobile phones. Sometimes people are giving out mobile phones, keys, building keys and badges. You want to make sure you're collecting those. So just making sure that when an employee terminates, it's done in a timely manner. How Mark was saying again with the disgruntled employee, if somebody, needs to be let go right away and they still have access, they could come back into the network, do something malicious, take some data or corrupt something. You just never know what employees will do these days. Another thing is lack of documentation. That is definitely a common factor with a lot of companies. Like I said before, you could have 20 processes, but you just don't have it documented. And documentation is really important for so many reasons. Things are constantly changing. You're working on a million different things. You might not remember something. Documentation is key for that. What if you're on vacation and you're the only person doing something and you have somebody that needs to back you up? If they can't get a hold of you, the documentation would be key for that. What if something happens with an incident or something that you need to handle and it's a very stressful environment? Having policies, plans, documentation, that's all really helpful in a stressful situation. Another thing is lack of asset inventory. Some people will say, yeah, we have inventory, but this part of the environment all the way over here is not part of that inventory. So you want to make sure that you have a full, complete asset inventory, because you can't protect what you don't know about. So if you haven't deployed a security tool and you deploy it out to all of your inventory, that is, you might not have actually deployed that security protection to everything, because you might be missing, a team or a whole environment. So accurate inventory is very important when you're deploying security protections, or just in general to know every kind of asset you have out there. And we'll talk a little bit more about endpoint protection later. But yes, having a complete inventory is really important.
Yeah, and if I could add on to that just for a minute, Anna,
Yeah.
this weekend, if you're a security nerd, and I know most of you aren't, but I am, there was a data, not a breach, but an announcement that came out that there's some really bad stuff going on right now. Technically, it's known as the Log4J vulnerability. And what it means is if you have a web server that's running any Java code on it, people can break into it. And it's really trivial to break in. It's not hard. It's like 3 lines of typing and you can break in. And so, I've been talking to people and say, make sure you've got your website set up. And, well, a lot of people I talk to say, well, we don't have a website. I understand, but if you have any tool that has a website, heck, even my DirecTV remote has access to a website, that can be broken into. So that asset inventory tells you where everything is so that when something like this comes up, you can say, oh yeah, we have this tool that uses a website for me to configure it. That could be a problem if it's available from the internet. So having that inventory allows you to stay up to date and know when something bad happens, what do I have to fix? And on that depressing note, let's move on to slide number 2. Sure, we will. I'm trying, folks. There we go. Device encryption. So when a laptop is stolen, regulatory requirements like HIPAA say, oh, if that contained client data, you have to report. Nobody wants to report any HIPAA violations. So there's an unless clause. So it says, if your device is stolen, it has to be reported if it contains 500 records, unless the device is encrypted. And so we're suggesting that every device that you can should be encrypted so that you don't have reportable events if something walks out the door. Whether it's a USB drive or a laptop, it should be encrypted. Now, Microsoft and Apple have both made this very simple to do. You can put a tool right on your laptop, ask for passwords when you first sign in. And if without that password, you can't get access to your computer. That's built into the operating system. It's an easy tool to deploy. Put it on there. Your devices are encrypted. Now, if it's stolen, you don't have a reportable event because no one can access that laptop without that password. So put those protections in there. Device encryption, like I said, it's inside of Windows settings. You can encrypt it. It takes a couple of hours, and then it's just done. BitLocker is a wonderful tool. Apple has the same tool. I don't remember the name for it, but they have the same tool to encrypt Apple devices. So encryption is a pretty easy tool to put in. There's no cost to it other than the time to encrypt the drive, and you can actually work while it's encrypting. So it's not like you have to set your computer aside, but encrypt it, then it's not reportable. Nothing walks out the door without that password. And then there's other devices that we want to talk a little bit about. USB devices are a really easy way to steal data. This can be a fob, a little USB device that plugs into the side of your computer that allows you to copy data off, slip it in your pocket, and walk away. There's also hard drives. The hard drives have gotten really compact, and you can take everything off of a network, put it into a hard drive, slip it into your back pocket, and walk out. So we recommend that people encrypt those devices so that if they're lost, no one can pick them up. I think that's a pretty basic control to install. And I think you had a pretty good example of this, didn't you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a pretty good story that happened to myself on this that I'm still not over because it's just scary. So many years ago, when I was getting my master's, for my final paper, it was like a 75-page paper. I saved it on a USB and I put it in my purse. From traveling to my house to traveling to school and getting in the classroom, I have no idea where that USB is. Even to this day, I never found it. It was not encrypted. It did have some other school work on it. And thankfully, I did have that report, that paper backed up. But it's a really good example of how easy it is to lose that really small USB. And even when you think you have it in a secure place, like your purse or your pocket, it's very easily losable. And I think to myself all the time, what if I had sensitive data on that USB? Or what if it was like a company USB and there was sensitive data on there, or even just your any employee data on there? If you lose that USB, somebody could easily pick that up. And just as Mark was saying before, if I had that encrypted, now thankfully I didn't have anything sensitive per se on that USB, but if the USB was encrypted, anybody that picked up the USB would have been useless to them. They wouldn't have been able to have the password. They wouldn't have been able to get into the USB. That's why encryption is so important. If you do allow USBs at your workplace, make sure they are encrypted, especially if they have potential PHI or PII or sensitive data, personally identified information or protected health information on your USBs. Encryption is key.
Thanks. Secure your laptops. True story. I had an executive that used to put the laptop in their back seat. Really great idea. They'd lock their door. I was really happy until the one day I realized they were driving a convertible with their top down, and the laptop actually walked away from that convertible. Make sure you're securing your laptops, especially when traveling. Airports can be scary. Something as simple as a clip on a zipper for a laptop case will keep people from just slipping their hands in and removing the device. Wi-Fi, if you're using public Wi-Fi, be aware it's public. If you're in a McDonald's, if you're in a Starbucks, if you're in an airport and you're using Wi-Fi, somebody else can see what you're doing. Make sure you're using some sort of VPN or other way to protect anything you're doing on that Wi-Fi. But remember, public is absolutely public. The person next to you could be able to see what you're doing just through your internet connection. Sorry, I skipped one. Let me go back real quick. So multiple users on a home PC. I don't want to get too wordy here, but I had a client that called me in. Her husband was overseas in the military, and the only way she could communicate with him was through her PC, and her PC didn't work. And she wanted to know if I could help her. And of course I helped her. And about a week later, she called back and said, the same problem's going on. I went back and looked, and I said, do you have a teenage son? And she said, yes. I said, he needs to be not visiting his websites on your home PC. He's bringing in stuff that's messing up your PC, so you can't talk to your husband. I said, let's make sure we get him a different computer or make him go to the library, because you have a second user that's messing up your primary device. So be careful of multiple users on home PCs. They can cause bad things to happen that affect you directly. Security tools. There are a lot of security tools out there. Do you need all of them? No. Do you need some of them? Yes. Virus protection is one that comes to mind. It's built into your operating system. Turn it on. Make sure you're using it. As you get into a larger or more mature organization, you'll want to do things to mature that protection, like checking to make sure every PC got updated this week. But the vendors are getting really good about patching their systems, but viruses still sneak through. Make sure these protections are up to date. Endpoint detection and response. So once you get the virus protection on there, there's a step beyond that. And this is not a free software, but it's a tool that allows your computer systems to become more adept at what happens when something bad happens. And what I mean by this is if somehow there's a detection made that something bad happened in your network, and it affects all networks with product ABC on it, these software tools can now tell you every PC that has product ABC, so you can go fix those first. They're a little bit smarter than virus protection, and they're able to reach across endpoints and sort of coordinate your response. So as you get beyond virus protection and you want to know what's next, endpoint detection and response are tools that help coordinate that. Logs and alerts. So as you build your computer network, more and more things are going on at the same time, and it's kind of hard to keep track. And so there are abilities inside of every software to create logs and alerts. And logs are important because if something bad happens, you want the ability to look back in time and say, how did this happen? When did this happen? So I know where to start fixing. In the times that I've dealt with actual break-ins from hackers and crackers, the log alerts, the logs have been able to tell us where they got in so that we can go back and either pass the information on to local authorities, the FBI, or help us actually track down the problems they're causing and help fix them quicker. Alerts are set up. I'm guessing that you've seen alerts in every PC you run, and something that'll pop up and say, something's out of date. Pay attention to those. They're important. There's a reason that they're showing up. A lot of those are built into your tools, your operating system. If you're using Office 365, those things are built in. Pay attention when those logs and alerts pop up. Oh, my favorite, two-factor. So two-factor authentication. This is what, as I talked about earlier, this is a second way to identify a user. Make sure that you know who's signing in. If your password gets reused, let's make sure that we've got another way to prevent people to come in or prevent people from coming in under our account. This is what the financial institutions are doing. You type in a username, a password, they'll say, okay, we're going to send a code to your phone. We're going to send an email to your email address to verify this is you. That's two-factor authentication. You're trying to prevent a simple password loss from allowing somebody to use your account. There's all sorts of types and ways to do two-factor authentication. There's tokens you can have on your that are standalone. There's tokens you can put on your phone. The federal government actually uses, it looks like a credit card. They call it a PIV card, a personal identity vehicle, weird name. But you actually have to have that. If you go to a doctor that uses Epic system, they use similar, it's a card around their neck. You tap the card to the keyboard. That assures that it's not just somebody using the password, it's the person that has the password and the card. So you've got two-factor authentication. Fingerprint readers are another way, but it's just a way to make sure that you are you. And I think you're seeing this more and more and more because passwords are something that got kind of messed up in the last decade. And they said, make these things really complex and then change them a lot. And what happened is people started writing them down because nobody could remember all those complex passwords that you have to change as soon as you remember it. And so people started writing down passwords because they had to remember them. Well, now that Post-it note falls off or that notebook gets borrowed, then your password's gone. And so the two-factor allows you to secure beyond just the password. And just, we may talk about this a little more later, but just as a note, they've actually changed the guidance on passwords. Those really weird passwords that nobody could remember, they're saying stop using those. Those don't really help because people write them down. Longer is the key. You don't need all those weird symbols in them, make them long. I use phrases. It's much more secure than, the weird ones that we used when they had complexity rules. Auto update. Make sure your devices that can update themselves are updating themselves. So in Microsoft, if you use a Microsoft operating system, there's an automatic update available and it'll let you schedule the time that it does it. My PC is scheduled every Tuesday at midnight to update itself. And that way, all I have to do is remember to leave it on. If I leave it on, it fixes itself because I've scheduled an auto update. More and more systems are going to auto update. If you use the Google Chrome browser, that auto updates now. And the reason we're doing this is all software has problems. There's vulnerabilities in software. And these vulnerabilities are discovered as time goes on. They're not known usually when the product ships. They discover them later when somebody breaks in. And so all of the vendors, the Microsofts of the world, are out there trying to find these things. And when they find them, they put a fix together. You want those fixes to get on your system as soon as possible. Auto updates a way to, number one, get it done as quickly as possible. But number two, you don't have to worry about forgetting. The computer just does it for you. The patching of systems has gotten really solid in the last 15 years. Before that, it wasn't as solid, but now it is. The auto updates just work. They fix your computer. They get those bugs out of the system so you're up and running the next day and not worrying about it. And then when really bad things happen, like the one I was talking about this last weekend, I'll leave my computer on every night because if that fix comes out, I want it on there right away. If you use a web service, an internet service provider, if you use Microsoft Office 365 or the G Suite or any of those tools that are hosted, those auto update all the time. They'll auto update between a document and the next document because the vendors have figured out how important these auto updates are. So get a schedule going, get those updates in, and try to automate them so you don't have human problems. All right, Anna, you want to talk about security awareness training? I feel like I've been talking a lot.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, and the next really important part to all of this is a really important piece here, just providing training to your employees. You want to be prepared. The more they learn, the more they're going to know, the more they're going to be able to see. It's just going to help your overall security program. So number one, just everything that we just discussed. Creating a baseline, protecting your endpoint, they need to make sure that they understand what antivirus is, that they understand what updates are. That way, when their, computer restarts on a Sunday or whenever you're going to have your updates apply, that they know what's going on. Using two-factor, getting them trained on two-factor. Mark was saying before, all the different types of ways that you can, whether that's a cell phone or a token or a card, fingerprint. There's so many different ways to do two-factor. So you just want to make sure that your employees are trained on all the things that we discussed before. The next thing is phishing, smishing, and vishing. So phishing attacks, that's the number one method that attackers use today. That's pretty much just getting an email that has an attachment or a link in it that's going to have you go to a website, ask you to put in your credentials so that they can steal your creds. So that's just the most common thing. So you're going to want to make sure that your employees know, if they get a random email from Wells Fargo and Wells Fargo is misspelled and it's saying that their account is going to be immediately closed if they don't log in right away, things like that. It's good that they're trained on recognizing those types of emails. And that can be for a couple of reasons. One, so that they don't click on the link. And two, so that they can call your help desk or, your support services to let you know that they received this, because if they received it, probably other employees received it. So you're going to want to make sure that they're, can be able to identify that type of attack. Smishing is similar to phishing from email, which is on text messages. This just happened just a week ago. My friend texted me because she knows I'm in security, and I've been, I try to actively talk to my friends about it. And she got a Venmo phishing where somebody was trying to get her to log in to her Venmo. And she was asking me, should I click on this? And I'm like, no, don't do it. So, SMS type text messaging is starting to be more popular too, because everybody's on their phone. And then there's vishing. And that's like a phone call where somebody's trying to actually call you over the phone and try to get your personal information or company information. I actually have a really kind of sad story about this one. So I had some neighbors a few years back where this wasn't very common, where, this attack was just starting to be out in the world. Not many people knew about it. But my neighbors received a call from the Canadian lottery that they had won some money. And they were an old retired couple, 80s, and they just had no clue about this type of attack here. So they fell for it, and they spent an entire month here or there giving these people money. And they ended up giving them like $70,000 total. And how we found out and helped them was they came to my mom and dad. Because they were my mom and dad's neighbors. And they asked my mom to borrow $1,500 because it was the last bit of money that they needed to pay the taxes on the money before they would get the money. And they promised to pay my mom and dad back. And my mom and dad knew exactly what was going on and ended up calling their son. And end story, they ended up spending $70,000 of their retirement to this pretend Canadian lottery. They did not get any lottery money. They lost their house. They now live with their son. It was a pretty sad story. So these things can definitely be very calculated, very convincing. Even the phishing and the smishing can be very convincing. You can get an email that looks like it's coming from internal, and it's, just asking you to look at a PDF that your HR person sent you. I mean, they look very, very convincing. So you want to definitely train your employees on those types of attacks. The next thing is regular reminders. So you want to stay in the know with the latest security news. I mean, like Mark was just saying, we found out about a security vulnerability over the weekend. These things come out very regularly. So you're going to want to send security emails to your employees to keep them up to date. Read security blogs, listen to podcasts. You can learn some amazing things from security professionals. There's even security awareness training tools and modules out there that will have security reminders that you can send monthly or weekly to your employees just to keep them updated on things. Next, we'll talk about passwords and password managers. So again, how Mark was saying before, we have the National Institute Standards and Technology, NIST, that has come out to say that the longer the password, the better, that they should be at least 15 characters. You just make the password something that you would remember. Passphrases are best. And then because so many people, I mean, I myself probably have at least 30, 40 accounts that I need to remember passwords for, I have a password manager. So you put your password and your account information into the password manager. That way it's a safe encrypted tool to save all your passwords to. You just have to remember the one password to get into the password manager, and it'll save all your passwords for you, so that you can make them very strong, very difficult, something that you don't need to remember because your password manager will remember that for you. One really neat tool that you can look at is KeePass. It's a free tool. It's a free password manager, so that you could look into that. The next thing is shredding your work documents. This is important at work as much it is as at home, especially with a lot of people working from home now. Usually at work, you might have like shred bins or dedicated areas to shred your documents. So anything that's confidential, anything that has sensitive information on it, you want to make sure that you shred that documentation. I think sometimes we're so focused on electronic information, we sometimes forget that we actually have paper. Some people still use paper. So you want to make sure that we shred that. And even at home, you're printing documents at home. So you want to make sure you have a shredder at home. And the last thing is a couple good tips that Mark and I wanted to talk about. One is the security blogs. So there is a security blog called Naked Security. I didn't name it. It's kind of a silly name. It basically is just describing like the raw nature of security. It's a really good blog. It doesn't go into too much detail to make it difficult to read if you're just a beginner or learning security. And it details a lot of vulnerabilities that come out, or new security protections, or just things that you can do, good best practices to keep your security program up to date. And then Mark, didn't you have a really good tip?
I don't know if it's really good, but I do have a tip. We talked originally about a scorecard. When you do a risk assessment or a gap assessment, you figure out what your biggest risks are and your hardest risks. I try to do two things with that list. Number one is hit your biggest risks, your critical risks first, but also sometimes there's some really quick hitters in there that you can just get off the board, whether they're high risk or low risk. But if you do a whole bunch of those little things, your number of risks, your exposure is in a little bit better spot. So don't just look at the critical risks. If you do a gap assessment, look for the quick hitters too, so you can get those cleaned up and out of the way. All right, the best defense you got is your humans. We talked about this earlier. This is your best defense against cyber threats. So, we talk about keeping people trained, keeping them informed, because they're the ones that are going to recognize bad stuff as it happens. They're the last chance you have to catch something as it's coming in or going out the door. We actually had an incident where somebody clicked on an email, and as soon as they clicked on it, they said, "Oh no, I shouldn't have done that." And so they called their help desk, their support desk, and said, I just clicked on an email. Now, first of all, it's a little late. I'd rather have them not click on it. But the fact that they knew that it was better that they call help desk was able to track the bad guys as they were coming in the door and stop them simply because the person reported it. If they'd have been embarrassed and not reported it, that could have been a breach. So recognize that the best defenses are humans. Another quick thing is I have clients that like to train once a year in cybersecurity awareness. I have one client in particular that was hacked by a foreign entity, a foreign government, with a ransomware demand, and they were able to clean up the mess. But they now train their people weekly because they understand the impact of humans and what a difference the right human interaction can have in being hacked. So when people ask me how often should I really train my people? There's not a straight answer, but they are your best defense. So the better trained they are, the better off you're going to be. And in some organizations where there is a lot of turnover, this is hard to do effectively, but signs work, quizzes work. Punishment doesn't usually work. It's more of a carrot than a stick approach, because you do want that engagement, but realize that training in your people are the best defense you have against the bad people. All right, let's recap. Start with the baseline, understand where you're at and what's good enough, or what's at least a starting place for a cybersecurity program, and start to address those risks. Anna?
And the next is protect your and keep it updated. Make sure you have that complete inventory and that all your points are protected. Make sure you have good encryption, antivirus, things like that.
Verify your security tools work, check them. It doesn't do any good to have a virus scanner on a PC if it's not updating. It's not helpful. So make sure your tools are working. Have somebody go in and check.
Use two-factor authentication wherever possible. We've talked about this over and over again, how important it is. If you have a password and you're saving it on a Post-it, somebody steals your Post-it, at least they can't get in with the username and password because you have two-factor authenticated. Not that you should keep your password on a Post-it. Use a password manager.
All right, keep your devices updated and make sure the updates are working. Enough said. All right.
Provide security awareness training. Just continue to learn. Make sure employees can point out any type of incident, anything that's not normal.
And recognize your best defense. It's the team. It's the people that work with you and around you. Make sure they're aware and they're doing the right things, or at least know how to do the right things so that they can help secure your organization. Do we have any questions?
All right, there's a few questions that came through in the chat. So one of them was, do we need a VPN on cell phones?
Yeah, I'm going to give you the answer you don't want to hear. And the answer is it depends. But let me describe that a little bit. It depends on what you're doing with your cell phone. Most websites are encrypted end to end. So if you're on a website, typically you don't need a VPN on a cell phone. As long as it's an HTTPS website, so it's running that secure link. If you're running a homegrown app or something in your environment that's not web-based, or it's not on a secured web server, then yes, you still need a VPN. You basically want to encrypt anything that happens between your phone and the other end.
Great. Another question that came up was, what would you recommend for security awareness training?
Anna, you want to take that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are a lot of really good tools out there. You just want to make sure that the security awareness training that you choose includes the modules that you need for your organization. If you are an organization that needs to be compliant with HIPAA, you're going to want to make sure that that training has HIPAA modules in there. If you're going to be creating custom training, you want to make sure that your training tool will be able to allow you to create custom training modules. There's training tools that you can pay, such as like a KnowBe4. Then there's other tools where you can find some free training, security awareness training, like SANS has a really good module for that.
Yeah,
And then how can,
sorry, I was just going to add one thing real quickly. You can do it yourself. It takes time. And that's why people buy this, because somebody else does the research. That's a business decision that we can't make, whether you want to do your own or buy something. If you're doing your own though, somebody has to be current on events and making sure that they understand what they're trying to communicate.
Another question that came up is, how can one confirm that all the systems are up to date?
Oh, great question. The obvious answer is look. It depends on the tools. Microsoft usually has a console that will tell you about all of their tools at once. But they need to be checked regularly. Anna, do you have any other hints or tips around that?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's reporting could be very helpful. You have, like Mark was saying, there are tools that have like dashboards and reporting where you could get a report every week just to make sure that every computer has the most updated virus definitions.
And then someone asked, what was the website to read about to get up-to-date cybersecurity news? You guys want to?
Anna, can you paste that into the blog if I take the next one?
Yeah, absolutely.
That'd be helpful.
Into the chat window.
And then another question that came through, how do we know that what we need to be compliant with?
Yeah, look at your contracts, look at who you're doing business with. And a lot of businesses, the answer is nobody. But healthcare is HIPAA, publicly traded is going to be Sarbanes-Oxley. If your business is required to be SOC 2 compliant, there's requirements around SOC 2 that we can speak to. Credit cards are PCI. International businesses, GDPR. Weird law, the way it's written currently is if you have a client that's or a user that's in another country, in an EU country, you have to be compliant with GDPR. So it doesn't follow the technology, it follows the person. I don't think they found a way to enforce that, but to answer the question, GDPR is one you have to look at. Canada has their own. So you have to look at your contracts and where you're doing business and who you're doing business with.
Great. All right. I think that was all the questions that came through on the chat. So thank you guys.
And I saw Anna has put that link out in the chat window for the security blog.
Yes, and that's just one of many security blogs that you can find online. But I just feel like this one is a really good place for somebody that's just learning in security because it has really good explanations of what's going on.
All right, then do you want to turn to Kirsten for our wrap up then? If no further questions.
All right. So hi, everyone. I would just want to thank Mark and Anna for today's presentation. That was great. You guys shared a ton of information. And I hope everyone that attended got a lot out of it and that those who will listen later on the recording also will. And hopefully you got some good ideas you can take away to your organizations as well, because that's our whole goal always, to give you something tangible you can, or intangible you can use and work within your organization. As always, please let your friends and colleagues know about these events. They're open to anybody in the nonprofit sector, and we do hope to return at some point, maybe this spring, to the Madison Club and be in person again. So we'll see what happens with that. And with that, as Lynn said, our next webinar or in-person event, it'll be Thursday, May 19th. We are determining the topic. So again, if you could complete your surveys that you'll get this afternoon, if you've got some good ideas for a topic and more importantly, a speaker that would go with that topic, that would be awesome. And we do want to make sure that we're presenting content that you're interested in. So please keep that in mind as well. And with that, thank you to everyone and our speakers and to Lynn. Hope you all have a happy holiday season, and we will hopefully see you in May of 2022 already. Thanks a lot, everyone.